Have you ever witnessed someone being judged, not for who they are, but for what they look like? Have you ever seen a moment where pride, prejudice, and power all collide at 30,000 feet in the air? Welcome back to Swift Tale, the place where stories meet soul and every moment carries a message. If this is your first time visiting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because today's story is one that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about respect, identity, and quiet power. Our story begins on a bright Monday morning at the Los Angeles International Airport, where travelers rushed to board Flight 762 bound for New York. The terminal buzzed with chatter, clinking coffee cups, and the soft hum of rolling suitcases. Among the crowd was a poised, elegant black woman named Dr. Maya Ellis, a woman who carried herself with effortless grace, her calm presence radiating quiet confidence. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit and a simple gold necklace, she looked like any successful professional heading to an important meeting. But what no one knew, not the passengers, not even the crew, was that Dr. Ellis wasn't just another traveler. She was the co-founder and CEO of Skylink Airlines, the very company operating the flight she was about to board. Unaware of this hidden truth, another passenger, Catherine Miller, a wealthy white socialite accustomed to special treatment, was already at the gate, tapping her manicured nails impatiently against her designer handbag. Catherine believed in a world where money and image spoke louder than humility and kindness. To her, first class wasn't just a luxury, it was her right. So when she saw Maya take what she assumed was her seat, Catherine didn't hesitate to react. This story isn't just about a seat on a plane. It's about perception, how people see others before they even speak a word. It's about the assumptions that run deep in society and what happens when someone challenges them with quiet strength instead of anger. It's a story that reminds us how dignity can speak louder than arrogance and how true power doesn't need to be announced, it simply exists. As we journey through this tale, we'll explore not only the confrontation that shocked an entire cabin, but also the profound truth behind it, that respect isn't given based on appearances, it's earned through actions. So buckle up, because what starts as a simple misunderstanding soon becomes a powerful lesson that captured the world's attention. And before we dive in, I want to ask you, what would you do if someone looked at you and decided in an instant that you didn't belong? Would you argue? Would you shout? Or would you let your truth speak for itself? Think about that as we begin this incredible story of grace, justice, and revelation. Before that unforgettable flight took off, before the confrontation that would go viral across the world, there was the story of the woman behind it all, Dr. Maya Ellis. To anyone passing her in the airport that morning, she was simply another traveler in a sharp business suit, sipping her coffee quietly as she waited for boarding to begin. But Maya's calm exterior concealed a lifetime of struggle, resilience, and triumph that few could ever imagine. Born and raised in the south side of Atlanta, Maya grew up in a modest neighborhood where dreams often felt too far away to touch. Her mother, Clara Ellis, worked two jobs, one as a school secretary by day and another as a cleaner by night, to provide for her only daughter. Even as a child, Maya saw the exhaustion in her mother's eyes, but she also saw something else: determination. Clara never let hardship define her family. She used to tell Maya, "Baby, you may not have everything, but you have you, and that's more than enough to change the world." Those words would become the foundation of everything Maya later built. Maya excelled in school, a quiet, focused student with a mind sharp enough to turn any setback into a lesson. When others doubted her, she studied harder. When guidance counselors told her that becoming an engineer was too ambitious, she smiled and applied to MIT anyway and got in on a full scholarship. College was no easy journey. She faced subtle racism, isolation, and professors who underestimated her, but Maya never allowed bitterness to take root. Instead, she turned every slight into motivation, earning her degree in aerospace engineering with honors. Her brilliance caught the attention of top aviation companies, and within a few years, she became one of the youngest black women to hold an executive position in the industry. But working within someone else's vision was never enough for Maya. She wanted to redefine air travel, not just through technology, but through treatment. She had seen too many stories of discrimination, too many passengers made to feel less than because of their color, background, or appearance. And so, with a small team and a heart full of purpose, she co-founded Skylink Airlines, a company built on innovation, inclusivity, and integrity. Skylink's mission was simple yet revolutionary: to make every passenger feel seen, safe, and valued. The airline started with just 3 planes and a dream. Within a decade, it had grown into a billion-dollar enterprise that rivaled industry giants. Maya's leadership style was unlike anyone else's: quiet, humble, but fiercely principled. She didn't crave headlines or luxury. Instead, she preferred flying undercover, sitting among her customers, observing how her crew treated people from all walks of life. That morning, as she prepared to board Flight 762, Maya wasn't traveling as a CEO. She was traveling as a silent observer, part of her personal mission to experience her airline the same way her passengers did. No special privileges, no priority check-in, no one calling her Madam Ellis. Just Maya, the traveler, the woman who had built an empire with grace and grit, and who still carried her mother's words like armor around her heart. While others saw her as just another face in the crowd, Maya saw something different: an opportunity to stay grounded, to keep her humanity intact amidst her success. She knew that true power didn't come from titles or money. It came from empathy, from understanding how it felt to sit in someone else's seat, literally and metaphorically. Little did she know that in just a few minutes, her quiet humility would be put to the ultimate test. The world would soon see not just the CEO of an airline, but the embodiment of what it means to lead with dignity in the face of ignorance. Across the terminal, near the VIP lounge where the morning light streamed through glass walls, Catherine Miller adjusted her silk scarf and scrolled impatiently through her phone. Everything about her radiated control, or at least the appearance of it. To the world, Catherine was the kind of woman who had everything: money, influence, and confidence wrapped in designer fabric. But beneath the surface, there was something else: a deep, unexamined belief that her comfort and status were guarantees, things she never imagined could be challenged. Catherine came from a long line of wealth. Her father was a corporate attorney, her mother a socialite who chaired fundraisers but never once cooked a family meal. Catherine had grown up surrounded by marble floors and private schools where everyone looked the same and thought the same. Conversations about race or inequality were as distant to her as another language, not because she was malicious, but because she had never been forced to see beyond her own reflection. That morning she was traveling first class to New York for what she called a little business and a little pleasure. She owned a boutique consulting firm that catered to luxury brands, a business built less on expertise and more on connections and charm. To her, image was everything. She moved through life expecting doors to open, lines to shorten, and people to bend. And when they didn't, she assumed it was because they were wrong, not her. As she approached the gate, Catherine noticed the first-class passengers beginning to board. She smiled slightly, the subtle smile of someone used to being at the front of every line. The gate agent greeted her politely, and Catherine responded with a tone that balanced between friendly and entitled. "First class, of course," she said, handing over her ticket without a second glance. Her seat number was 2A, right by the window, the perfect spot to sip champagne and post an Instagram story before takeoff. But as she stepped into the cabin, her expression shifted. There, seated gracefully in 2A, was a black woman, calm, composed, reading something on a tablet. Catherine froze for a moment, confusion flickering across her face. She looked down at her ticket, then back up at the woman. Surely this must be some kind of mistake. Her seat, it couldn't be. Her mind immediately searched for an explanation. Maybe the woman had misread her seat number. Maybe she'd wandered into first class by accident. Catherine's thoughts weren't consciously cruel, but they were built on layers of unchecked assumptions, ones that had followed her all her life. She had never had to ask herself why she felt entitled to more. She simply was. As she stood there, passengers continued to file in behind her, forcing her to step aside slightly. The flight attendant approached with a professional smile, asking, "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Catherine didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on Maya, her disbelief hardening into irritation. "Yes," she said finally, in a clipped tone. "Actually, there seems to be a problem. This woman is sitting in my seat." Her words weren't loud yet, but they carried a sharpness that made nearby passengers glance up. Maya looked up from her tablet, calm and unbothered. "I believe this is seat 2A, she said politely. "Here's my boarding pass if you'd like to check." Catherine's face tightened. She didn't take the pass. She didn't even glance at it. I don't think that's necessary, she said coldly. I know where I'm supposed to sit. The attendant blinked, sensing tension. Let me just double-check, ma'am. As the attendant scanned both tickets, Catherine crossed her arms and sighed, tapping her foot impatiently. She didn't notice the subtle looks being exchanged between nearby passengers. All she could feel was the growing discomfort that someone like her, someone she had already decided was out of place, dared to occupy what she believed belonged to her. What Catherine didn't realize, as she stood there in her quiet outrage, was that she was about to step into a moment that would define her for the rest of her life. The same seat she fought for would soon become a symbol, not of privilege, but of humility. For now, though, she didn't see that. She only saw a seat she believed she owned, and a woman she believed didn't deserve it. And that was all it took for everything to begin unraveling. The soft hum of the airplane cabin filled the air as first-class passengers settled in, adjusting seatbelts and stowing their luggage. Dr. Maya Ellis sat comfortably by the window in seat 2A, quietly scrolling through the morning headlines on her tablet. The boarding process was calm, the usual mix of chatter and movement. She took a sip of water, smiled politely at a flight attendant, and thought of how refreshing it was to fly anonymously, no meetings, no cameras, no board members asking for her time, just a moment of peace before a long day. That peace didn't last long. A sharp voice broke through the steady rhythm of boarding announcements. "Excuse me," it said, firm and pointed. Maya looked up to find a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair standing in the aisle beside her. The woman's expression was tight, the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "You're in my seat," the woman declared, gesturing toward Maya's row. Maya blinked once, calm and steady. "I'm sorry." "My seat," the woman repeated, louder this time. "This is 2A." Maya glanced down at her boarding pass, then back up, her tone measured. "Yes, that's correct. This is 2A." She offered a small smile and held out her pass. "Would you like to check?" The woman, Catherine Miller, frowned but didn't take it. "No, I don't need to check. I fly this airline all the time. I know my seat when I see it." A few heads turned. The conversation was starting to draw attention. A flight attendant hurried over, sensing the rising tension. "Good morning," the attendant said smoothly. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes, there is," Catherine said, pointing at Maya. "This woman is sitting in my seat, and I'd like her moved immediately." The attendant's eyes flickered from Catherine to Maya, then to the tickets each woman held. "May I see your boarding passes, please?" Maya handed hers over without hesitation, her expression calm. Catherine, with a sigh, handed hers too, muttering something about mix-ups and people not understanding assigned seating. As the attendant scanned the passes, a small silence fell over the cabin. The tension hung heavy, like static before a storm. Passengers in nearby seats leaned subtly closer, pretending not to watch, but unable to look away. Finally, the attendant looked up, her voice even but cautious. "Ma'am," she said to Catherine, "it appears that Ms. Ellis is seated correctly. You're actually in 3A, just one row behind." Catherine's face flushed pink. "That's impossible," she said, her voice rising. "I always sit in 2A. Check again." The attendant rechecked, but the truth didn't change. "I'm afraid the ticket is correct, ma'am, 3A." A low murmur rippled through the cabin. Maya could feel eyes on her, some sympathetic, others curious, a few uncomfortable. She took a slow breath, choosing composure over confrontation. "It's all right," she said softly. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." But Catherine wasn't done. Her pride had been pricked. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're telling me this," she gestured vaguely toward Maya, "is sitting in my spot while I'm moved like some economy passenger." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. The attendant's polite smile faltered. A man across the aisle shook his head in disbelief. Maya met Catherine's eyes, her tone still level. "Ma'am, I'm simply sitting where my ticket places me. Perhaps we should all just take our seats so the flight can continue." Her calm only seemed to irritate Catherine more. "You know what, forget it," Catherine muttered, snatching her ticket back. Some people just don't know how things work. But the flight attendant didn't move. The captain had been alerted to a seating dispute in first class, something no one wanted before takeoff. A moment later, a tall man in uniform appeared at the front of the cabin. His voice was calm but firm. "Is there a problem here?" Catherine straightened, gesturing again. "Yes, there is. This woman is sitting in my seat. I've flown this route a dozen times. This has never happened before." The captain nodded once, then looked at the flight attendant. "Let's verify again." He checked the manifest himself. "Seat 2A, Dr. Maya Ellis." That name hit him like a quiet thunderbolt. His eyes widened slightly. He turned toward her, recognition flickering in his face, but Maya, still preferring discretion, gave a tiny shake of her head. "Not yet." He swallowed, cleared his throat, and looked at Catherine. "Ma'am, the seating is correct. Please take your assigned seat so we can begin takeoff." Catherine looked stunned, almost betrayed that the staff didn't side with her. Her voice dropped but stayed cold. "Fine, but this is ridiculous. I'll be filing a complaint." She turned sharply and moved to 3A, her perfume trailing behind her like smoke. Maya exhaled softly, returning her gaze to the window. The engines began to hum, the plane preparing to taxi. But even as the commotion settled, the moment lingered in the air, a subtle echo of something much bigger than a seat dispute. Little did anyone know that simple misunderstanding was just the beginning of a story that would expose far more than entitlement. It would reveal truth, humility, and the kind of quiet power that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The aircraft doors closed with a soft hiss, and the flight attendants began their final preparations for takeoff. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was thick, not with noise, but with something heavier, invisible, and uncomfortable. The tension from the confrontations still lingered, like a low hum that refused to fade. Dr. Maya Ellis sat quietly, her seatbelt fastened, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her calm expression masked what she truly felt, not anger, but a deep, familiar ache. She had lived through moments like this before, the looks, the assumptions, the subtle disbelief that someone like her could belong in certain spaces. She had long learned that dignity was her greatest defense. 2 rows behind, Catherine Miller sat stiffly in 3A, pretending to scroll through her phone. Every tap on the screen was sharper than the last, every breath edged with irritation. She could feel the glances from nearby passengers, some disapproving, others curious. She hated being the center of attention for the wrong reason, yet, in her mind, she was the wronged one. Meanwhile, in the galley, 2 flight attendants whispered in low tones. "That was tense," one murmured, stealing a glance toward first class. "Did you see how that woman talked to her? She didn't even let her explain." The other sighed, nervous. "Yeah, but what are we supposed to do? We can't exactly call her out. You know how these things go, complaints, management, bad reviews, it's always tricky." They both fell silent when the captain passed by. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed something else, recognition. He knew who was sitting in. He had flown for Skylink for nearly 6 years. He had seen the name Dr. Maya Ellis on internal memos, safety updates, and company newsletters. She wasn't just a name to him. She was the visionary who built the airline from the ground up. But he also knew she valued discretion. She often traveled under the radar, observing her company's performance firsthand. If she hadn't revealed herself during the altercation, there was a reason, so he stayed silent for now. As the plane ascended through a blanket of clouds, the tension slowly began to settle, though not completely. The attendants made their rounds with beverages, offering champagne and orange juice. When one approached Maya, she smiled politely. "Just water, please." The attendant nodded, her face warming with quiet respect. She had realized who Maya was, too, and her stomach twisted with guilt. If I had known, she thought, I would have stepped in sooner. But then, another voice in her mind countered. Why should it matter who she is? Respect shouldn't depend on status. Up in 3A, Catherine couldn't relax. Every few minutes, she found herself glancing toward Maya. The woman wasn't talking, wasn't gloating, wasn't even looking her way, and somehow, that made Catherine more uncomfortable. It was easier to dislike someone who fought back, but Maya's composure felt unshakable, and that silence was louder than any argument. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cruising at 33,000 feet. Smooth skis ahead. As his voice faded, one of the attendants approached Maya again, her tone softer now. "Dr. Ellis," she began, then caught herself. Maya looked up calmly. "Yes." The attendant hesitated. I just wanted to say thank you for being patient earlier. We should have handled that better." Maya offered a kind smile. "There's nothing to apologize for. Everyone learns through moments like this." Her voice carried no resentment, just quiet truth. The attendant nodded, visibly moved, and returned to her duties. A few seats away, a businessman leaned toward Maya. "I just want to say," he whispered, "the way you handled that was incredible. Most people would have made a scene." Maya gave a small, knowing smile. "Anger burns fast," she said, "but grace lasts longer." The man nodded, impressed, though he had no idea who she truly was. Back in the cockpit, the captain couldn't shake the weight in his chest. He knew what awaited them upon landing. Word would travel fast once people learned who had been on board. And while the crew had done their jobs technically right, the question that lingered was moral. Had they done what was fair? As hours passed, the cabin settled into quiet. Catherine dozed lightly, the sound of the engines soothing but not comforting, somewhere in the haze of sleep. She replayed the moment in her head, the looks from other passengers, the awkward silence, the embarrassment. She didn't realize it yet, but something inside her had begun to shift, a small crack forming in the wall of her assumptions. Meanwhile, Maya gazed out the window, watching sunlight spill across the clouds. She thought of her mother, of the nights when they had dreamed of something more, of a world that didn't judge before it listened. She had built Skylink for that world, one where everyone, no matter their background, felt they belonged. But moments like this reminded her how much work was still left to do. Little did anyone know, the flight they were on would soon become headline news. And when the truth came out, when the world learned who the woman in 2A really was, the lessons from this quiet tension in the sky would ripple far beyond that cabin. The flight had reached cruising altitude. Sunlight spilled across the cabin in long, golden ribbons, casting warm reflections off champagne glasses and polished tray tables. Everything seemed calm, at least on the surface. Yet beneath that calm, something still buzzed faintly, the weight of what had happened before takeoff. Dr. Maya Ellis sat silently in her seat, eyes drifting from the clouds outside to the passengers around her. Some had moved on, losing themselves in books or films, but others, including a few flight attendants, couldn't quite look her in the eye. She noticed their unease, their quiet guilt, and she understood it. She didn't hold anger in her heart, only disappointment, not for herself, but for how often these stories played out in everyday life, unseen, unspoken, and unresolved. Catherine Miller, seated just behind her in 3A, still felt the sting of embarrassment. The longer she sat, the more her frustration began to twist into something else, discomfort. She had expected Maya to be smug, to throw looks of triumph or gloat silently. But she didn't. Maya's calm, almost regal composure was disarming. It forced Catherine to sit with herself, with her own reflection in this quiet, floating mirror of self-awareness. The hum of the engines filled the silence until the flight attendants began the meal service. Catherine pressed her call button. When an attendant appeared, she said, with forced politeness, "I'd like to speak with the captain when he has a moment." The attendant hesitated. She knew this wasn't about the food. "I'll see what I can do, ma'am." Moments later, the captain stepped out from the cockpit, his hat tucked neatly under his arm. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried a quiet gravity. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Captain Reynolds. I understand you wanted to speak with me." Catherine straightened, lowering her voice so others wouldn't hear. "Yes, I wanted to file a complaint. That woman in 2A caused quite a scene earlier. She took my seat, and your attendants were completely unhelpful." The captain listened without interrupting. His gaze flicked briefly toward Maya, who was quietly sipping her water, unaware of the conversation. Then he looked back at Catherine. "I see, and just to clarify, you're referring to Dr. Ellis." Catherine frowned. "Doctor," she repeated, "I don't care what her title is. The point is." But the captain's next words stopped her cold. "Ma'am, I don't think you realize who Dr. Ellis is." She blinked. "Who she is?" The captain gave a faint, measured smile. Dr. Maya Ellis is the CEO and founder of Skylink Airlines, the airline you're flying on right now. For a moment, Catherine just stared at him, the words not fully registering. When they did, her entire body seemed to stiffen. Wait, she owns this airline. The captain nodded. Yes, ma'am, she's my boss. She's everyone's boss here. Silence dropped between them. The hum of the engines seemed louder now, the air heavier. Catherine's face flushed crimson. Every memory of her own arrogance earlier replayed in her mind, every cutting word, every assumption, every sideways glance. Her throat went dry. I didn't know, she whispered. The captain nodded again, his tone steady but kind. I understand, but perhaps that's the point, isn't it? We don't always know who we're speaking to or what they carry inside them. Catherine sank back in her seat, speechless. The captain returned to the cockpit, and for a few moments, Catherine simply stared at the back of Maya's seat, that quiet navy blue headrest that now felt like a mirror of her own shame. Then, unable to sit still, she unbuckled her seatbelt and rose to her feet. Several heads turned as she approached Maya's row. The flight attendant stepped forward instinctively, but Maya raised a hand gently, signaling it was all right. Catherine's voice trembled slightly. Dr. Ellis, she began. Maya turned, her expression calm, unreadable. I owe you an apology. I had no idea who you were. I spoke to you terribly. Maya tilted her head, her tone even. You owe me an apology not because of who I am, but because of how you treated someone you thought was beneath you. The words weren't angry, they were simple, clear, and true, and that truth hit Catherine harder than any insult ever could. I'm sorry, Catherine said again, quieter now, the fight gone from her voice. Maya nodded once, offering a small smile. Apology accepted. I hope next time you'll remember that respect doesn't have to be earned through titles. Catherine swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. I will, she whispered. Then she returned to her seat, her heart pounding, feeling smaller than she ever had, but for the first time in her life, it wasn't because of humiliation. It was because of understanding. The rest of the cabin had gone silent during the exchange. When Maya turned back toward the window, someone began to clap softly, then another joined in. Within moments, the cabin was filled with quiet applause, not the loud, performative kind, but genuine, reverent acknowledgement. Maya smiled faintly, gazing out at the clouds again. She hadn't wanted a spectacle, only peace. But sometimes, truth reveals itself in ways you can't control, and in that truth, the world learns something it didn't know it needed. At 33,000 feet, without anger, without shouting, one woman had reminded an entire plane, and soon an entire world, that true power doesn't demand attention. It simply commands respect. The plane hummed steadily, cutting through the clouds like a silver arrow, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere had changed. The tension that once filled the air had dissolved, replaced by something quieter, heavier, reflection. Every passenger who had witnessed the confrontation now sat still, lost in their own thoughts. They had just seen a moment that stripped away layers of arrogance, class, and assumption in a matter of seconds. Dr. Maya Ellis leaned back in her seat, her hands resting calmly on her lap. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile triumphantly. Her silence spoke volumes, a silence that held grace, dignity, and an unspoken reminder that true leadership doesn't need validation. Across the aisle, a few passengers exchanged glances, not of gossip, but of awe. They had seen plenty of people with power before, but never anyone who wielded it with such humility. Catherine, meanwhile, sat motionless in her seat. The apology she had given had been real, but the weight of it lingered in her chest. She couldn't stop replaying the moment the captain told her who Maya was. The words, "She owns this airline," echoed like a drumbeat in her mind. It wasn't just the shock of realizing Maya's authority, it was the realization of how easily she had dismissed someone purely based on appearance. She reached for the in-flight magazine, hoping to distract herself, but fate had a cruel sense of irony. On the back cover, a glossy article headline read, "Meet Dr. Maya Ellis, the woman who reimagined air travel." Catherine froze. There it was, Maya's face, smiling confidently beside a Skylink jet, her story printed for the world to see. a story Catherine could have known if she had cared enough to look. Her hands trembled slightly as she read, from a young girl who loved watching planes take off to becoming the youngest black woman to own and operate an international airline. Every sentence cut deeper. Catherine felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: humility, the kind that doesn't destroy but rebuilds, the kind that teaches. A few rows back, other passengers whispered softly. Some spoke about how poised Maya had been, others about how embarrassed they felt for not speaking up earlier when Catherine had confronted her. One elderly man, a retired teacher, muttered to his wife, "That woman just gave everyone on this flight a lesson they'll never forget." Even the flight attendants seemed changed. They moved through the aisles with quieter confidence, as though proud to serve under the woman who had just shown the world what true professionalism looked like. One young attendant, eyes glistening, gently set a fresh glass of water on Maya's tray. "Ma'am," she said softly, "on behalf of the crew, thank you for the way you handled everything." Maya smiled gently, her voice kind but steady. "Thank you, but I only did what anyone should do: treat others with respect, even when they don't return it." The attendant nodded, visibly moved. As the flight neared its destination, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly into Atlanta. On behalf of Skylink Airlines, and personally on behalf of myself and the crew, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today." He paused briefly, his tone shifting slightly. "And to Dr. Ellis, it's always an honor to have you on board." A ripple of quiet laughter and light applause spread through the cabin again. This time, Catherine joined in. Her claps were soft, hesitant, but genuine. When the plane finally landed, the passengers began to disembark one by one. Many slowed down as they passed Maya's seat, offering polite nods or quiet words of admiration. "Thank you for the lesson," one woman said. "You've changed the way I see people." Even Catherine stopped before exiting. She looked down at Maya, not from a place of superiority this time, but with respect. "Dr. Ellis," she said softly, "I can't undo what I said, but I promise I'll never look at another person the same way again." Maya looked up, her gaze warm. "That's how change begins," she said simply. Catherine smiled weakly, tears threatening her eyes, and turned to leave. When the last passenger had gone, Maya gathered her things and stepped off the plane. The crisp airport air greeted her as she walked toward the terminal, her heels echoing softly against the floor. Reporters weren't waiting. Cameras weren't flashing. But somehow, that moment, quiet and unpublicized, felt more powerful than any headline could capture. What had started as a seat dispute had transformed into a silent revolution in empathy. A reminder that dignity, once displayed, can reshape hearts in ways no policy or punishment ever could. And as Maya walked away, passengers behind her carried something new, a story they would retell for years, not because of her wealth or title, but because of how she made them feel. By the time Dr. Maya Ellis stepped off the plane, the world had already begun to notice. Unbeknownst to her, several passengers had recorded short clips of the confrontation, not out of malice, but because they instinctively knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. One video, only 40 seconds long, showed Catherine's shocked expression as the captain revealed the truth. She owns this airline. Within hours of landing, that clip began spreading across social media like wildfire. At first, it appeared on TikTok and Twitter under the simple caption, "When you realize the woman you disrespected runs the whole airline." Within minutes, thousands of likes poured in. By morning, millions had seen it. News outlets scrambled to verify the story. Some assumed it was fiction, a social media parable about privilege and prejudice. But when Skylink Airlines released a brief statement confirming the encounter had indeed happened, the internet erupted. Headlines flashed across screens everywhere. "Passenger learns hard lesson after insulting airline owner mid-flight." Meet Dr. Maya Ellis, the billion-dollar CEO who chose grace over revenge. Maya's phone buzzed non-stop. Emails from journalists, talk shows, and even government officials filled her inbox. But she didn't chase the spotlight. Instead, she issued a simple public statement. I believe respect should never depend on status. We are all passengers in the same sky. Those words went viral again, quoted, shared, and printed on posters. Students discussed it in classrooms, business leaders referenced it in speeches. Even celebrities reposted her quote with captions like, "That's real class." Meanwhile, Catherine Miller faced her own flood of attention. Someone had identified her in the video, and within hours, she became the target of online criticism. Her inbox overflowed with hateful messages, and her employer received calls demanding she be fired. But when Maya learned about the harassment, she stepped in again, this time publicly defending the very woman who had wronged her. "This isn't about punishing anyone," she wrote. "Growth requires grace." Catherine apologized, and that's where healing begins. That response changed everything. The outrage softened into reflection. Comment sections that once seethed with anger turned contemplative. People began sharing their own stories, times they had judged someone unfairly, or moments they wished they'd shown more understanding. Maya's forgiveness became the next viral moment, proving that compassion could trend just as easily as conflict. Television networks invited Maya to speak, but she declined most appearances. Instead, she donated $1 million to launch the Skylink Leadership Scholarship, designed to help underrepresented students pursue careers in aviation and business. The press release simply read, "When we lift others, the sky gets wider for everyone." Catherine, humbled and inspired, also released a statement. In a heartfelt video filmed from her living room, she said, "I was wrong. I made assumptions that came from ignorance, and Dr. Ellis showed me what real leadership looks like. I want to spend the rest of my life living up to that example." Her voice cracked, but the sincerity was undeniable. Surprisingly, the internet forgave her. Soon, the story evolved from a viral scandal into a global movement. Hashtags like "Respect Takes Flight" and "Grace in Power" filled timelines. Airlines began using Maya's quote in diversity training sessions. Schools invited her to speak about empathy and equity. She didn't just own an airline anymore, she had become a symbol of modern integrity. In one particularly moving moment, a teenage girl from Chicago posted a selfie wearing a Skylink hoodie with the caption, "If she can own the skis, maybe I can too." That post alone gathered 10 million likes and thousands of comments from young women around the world. Maya read that post late one night, sitting alone by her office window overlooking the city lights. For the first time since the incident, she let herself smile fully. She hadn't wanted fame, she'd wanted fairness. And somehow, through a misunderstanding in seat 2A, she'd given the world a story it desperately needed, one about grace, identity, and quiet strength. The viral noise would fade eventually, it always did, but the message would linger. Because in that brief encounter, the world had been reminded that respect doesn't bow to money, color, or titles. It rises above them, soaring freely, like the planes that carried her name across the sky. Days turned into weeks, and though the viral noise slowly faded, its echoes continued to ripple through boardrooms, classrooms, and dinner tables around the world. But for Dr. Maya Ellis, life returned to something close to normal, or at least her version of it. Her calendar filled again with meetings, strategy sessions, and late nights reviewing expansion plans for Skylink's new routes. Yet something had shifted inside her. The experience aboard that flight had peeled back layers she hadn't realized she carried. The constant pressure to prove herself, the silent armor she wore against the judgments of others. When Maya's car pulled into her long, tree-lined driveway one evening, she paused before getting out. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and violet, colors that reminded her of altitude and freedom. Inside her home, trophies lined the shelves, awards gleamed in glass cases, but what caught her eye was a single framed photo on the table, her younger self, standing on an airport observation deck with her father, pointing at a departing jet. Beneath it, in her father's neat handwriting, were the words, "Don't just ride the plane, build it." She smiled softly. Her father had been a mechanic who never got to fly, but he had taught her something more important than flight, the dignity of work and the strength of humility. That day on the plane, she realized she hadn't just defended herself, she had honored his memory. Later that week, Maya visited Skylink's headquarters in Atlanta. The entire building buzzed with renewed energy. Employees greeted her with genuine smiles, not the stiff, corporate kind. On her office desk sat a small card signed by dozens of staff members. It read, "Thank you for leading us with grace, not power." She ran her fingers over the words, feeling the weight of them. Leadership, she thought, wasn't about ownership. It was about stewardship, about lifting others higher than they thought they could go. That afternoon, she called an impromptu meeting with her executive team. "We've gotten a lot of attention recently," she began, "but I don't want our legacy to be about a viral video. I want it to be about what we do next." She announced new initiatives: fair hire policies, mentorship programs for young women in aviation, and cultural sensitivity training across all divisions. "We can't change how the world sees us overnight," she said, "but we can change how we show up in the world." The room filled with quiet nods and a spark of pride that spread from one face to another. Meanwhile, Catherine Miller reached out privately. She had been volunteering at a local youth center, teaching etiquette and empathy workshops. She sent Maya an email that simply said, "Thank you for not giving up on me when I didn't deserve your grace. Because of you, I'm learning how to see people again." Maya read the message twice, her eyes misting. She replied, "Then my lesson was worth it." One evening, while reviewing Skylink's scholarship applications, she came across a letter from a teenage girl in Kenya. The girl wrote, "People here know your story. They say if Dr. Ellis can fly, we can too." Maya set the letter down, her heart swelling. She realized her influence had stretched far beyond boardrooms or airport terminals. It had become a symbol of possibility. On her next flight, a quiet red-eye with no cameras, no press, she sat by the window again. The engines roared softly beneath her feet, the cabin lights dimmed, and the clouds rolled beneath like silver waves. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Somewhere below, thousands of passengers flew on planes bearing her company's name, each trusting the sky to carry them safely. For Maya, that was the real reward. Not the fame, not the headlines, but knowing that she had turned a moment of prejudice into a movement of perspective. She had taken the seat once denied to her and turned it into a platform for others to rise. As dawn broke over the horizon, she whispered quietly to herself, "This is only the beginning." The sky, vast and endless, seemed to agree. As the story of Dr. Maya Ellis draws to a close, we're left with more than just a dramatic encounter on a plane. We're left with a lesson that stretches far beyond the clouds. What began as a simple misunderstanding over a seat became a story about identity, grace, and the quiet power of self-respect. In a world where power often shouts, Maya's strength whispered, and still, it was heard everywhere. The truth is, life will always put us in situations where we're tested, sometimes publicly, sometimes privately. We'll meet people who underestimate us, judge us, or mistake our calm for weakness. But Maya's story reminds us that the loudest form of power isn't in shouting back. It's in standing tall, staying composed, and letting your worth speak for itself. Her grace didn't just change one flight. It changed how people around the world thought about respect and humility. Imagine if every confrontation, every moment of bias or misunderstanding ended not with retaliation, but with wisdom. Imagine if we all chose to respond like Maya, with quiet strength instead of loud pride, with forgiveness instead of fury. How different would our communities look? How much lighter would the world feel? Dr. Ellis proved something we often forget, that true leadership isn't about titles or wealth. It's about how you treat people when you have nothing to gain. It's about choosing dignity even when others don't offer it to you. That's what makes her story powerful. That's what makes her story unforgettable. And Catherine's transformation is just as important. She went from shame to self-awareness, from prejudice to purpose. Her growth showed us that redemption is possible, that even our worst mistakes can become our greatest teachers if we are humble enough to learn from them. That's the quiet miracle of this story. Both women walked away changed. One found peace in forgiveness, and the other found freedom in accountability. In a world obsessed with image, Maya's calm composure showed that character still matters. She didn't need to prove herself with anger or ego. She proved herself through grace. Her message, "We are all passengers in the same sky," will echo for years, a reminder that we share more than we think, and the sky is wide enough for everyone. So to everyone watching, ask yourself, what seat are you sitting in today? Are you looking down on someone without knowing their story? Or are you sitting in your truth, quietly, powerfully, waiting for the world to catch up to who you really are? At Swift Tale, we bring stories like this not just to entertain, but to remind us what empathy, respect, and humanity truly look like when they take flight. If you're visiting for the first time, welcome to the community. And if you've been here before, you already know what we stand for: stories that make us think, make us feel, and make us grow. Before we go, here's what I want you to remember. Never let someone else's ignorance shrink your worth. Stay calm when others lose their balance. That's where your power lives. And when you have the chance to be right or to be kind, choose kindness every single time. If this story inspired you or reminded you of the power of grace, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Swift Tale for more stories that uplift, challenge, and awaken something deeper within us. And I want to hear from you. What did this story mean to you? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose grace over anger? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might be the one that inspires someone else to do the same. Until next time, this is Swift Tale, reminding you that the sky has no limits, especially when you rise above the storm. Stay inspired, stay kind, and remember your story matters.